The white quiet came early the year. They brought me the dragon to bury. I had worked Vale Dock for 11 years by then, and I knew the season the way a man knows the ache in an old break. Before the instruments, before the bulletins, somewhere in the joint of the thumb. Kasser's sun is a poor, cheap thing at the best of times, a coin gone thin at the edges, and when the quiet comes it dims further still, pulls its light back into itself like a fist closing, and the frost climbs the open ground until the whole reach is white and silent and patient as a held breath. They named it the white quiet because nothing moves in it that does not have to. The wise things go under. The foolish things freeze where they stand, and the snow makes them tidy. I was neither wise nor foolish. I was the keeper of the dock, which meant I stayed and the snow did not make me tidy, and that was the whole of my distinction in the world. Vale Dock sat at the lip of the frontier, the last serviced berth before the long dark between Kasser and the inner Habs, a sprawl of heat-cord sheds and freight cradles and one squat tower where I slept and ate and watched the weather come. We took on cargo that the bigger ports would not touch, quarantine freight, contraband seed, things with a smell or a sickness or a question mark on the manifest. That was the work. You learn not to ask what was in a sealed cradle. You learn to keep the heat cores fed, and the bay doors sound and your own counsel close, and in 11 years that had been enough. The dragon came in on a gray afternoon 3 days into the quiet, when the light was already failing by the second meal, and the frost had begun its slow march up the cradle struts. I heard them before I saw them. You always hear the wormkin first, that low displacement of air, that whump and drag of wings too large for the sky to forgive easily, the sound a sail makes in a gale if the sail were the size of a barn. 3 of them came down out of the failing light, and they came down hard and fast and without grace, which told me something before they ever folded a wing. The wormkin do not land like that unless they want to be gone again quickly, unless the errand shames them. They were big, the 3 of them, war-bred by the look, long slate-dark bodies armored in overlapping scale, necks like the prows of ships, horns swept back and yellowed at the tips, eyes the flat hot gold of a banked forge. They set down in the receiving yard and the frost hissed and steamed where their breath touched it, and between them, slung in a freight cradle meant for engine cores, they carried a 4th. I knew the 4th was dying before I knew anything else about him. You learn that smell at a dock like mine. It is not death exactly. Death is cleaner. It is the smell of a body that has given up the work of keeping itself, the Swedish rot of a wound that will not close, the ammonia reek of an animal lying too long in its own failure. It came off the cradle in a wave when they set it down, and one of the 3 wardrakes turned its head away from it, and I understood that even they could not stand the smell of him. He was an adult, full-grown, as long as the cradle and spilling over it, and he was molting, and he was molting wrong. I had seen the wormkin molt before. Every few years they shed and renew, the old scale slewing away in slabs and the new coming in beneath, bright and soft, hardening over a span of days. It is a private thing for them, I had gathered. They go to ground for it the way a sick man takes to his bed. This one had not gone to ground. This one had been carried, and the molt had soured on him, the old scale coming away in gray, weeping sheets, half of it shed and half of it still clinging in stinking strips, and beneath it the new scale was not bright but raw, a livid copper pink, cracked in places and seeping. His wings, God, his wings. The membrane had gone thin and translucent and torn, hanging from the wing fingers in tatters like a sail after a storm, and I knew without being told that this was a creature that would not fly again, perhaps ever, perhaps for a long while. A grounded dragon. There is no sorrier thing in all the reaches. One of the wardrakes spoke. The wormkin can shape our words when they trouble too, low and grinding, like rock dragged over rock, and this one troubled too, barely. Keeper, it said, this is quarantine freight. It is paid for, the bay, the heat, until it is done. Until it's done, I repeated because I am slow and like to be sure. Done how? The drake looked at me with those forge gold eyes, and there was nothing in them I could read. And that was its own answer. "It is molt cursed," the drake said. "It is not to be looked upon by the long, keep it from sight until it ends. Then signal and we will come for what remains." What remains? I have unloaded a great many cradles in my time, and I have learned to keep my face shut like a strong-box, and I kept it shut then. But I looked at the thing in the cradle, at the great heaving sides, the cracked copper hide, the wreck of the wings, the long head laid flat on the cradle floor with one gold eye half open and watching me, just me, out of all of it, and something in me that I had thought frozen years ago put out one small green shoot in the cold. "He's not done yet," I said. "He soon will be," said the war drake, and it spread its wings and the other two with it, and the frost screamed under them, and they went up into the failing light and were gone, and they did not look back, and I noticed that. I noticed that none of the three of them looked back at the fourth, not once, not even the smallest turn of the head, and I have thought about that a great deal in the years since. To leave a thing to die is one matter. To leave it without a backward glance is another, and it is a colder one, and I held it against them then and I hold it against them still, for all that came after. So that was how I came to keep the dragon. I got him into the far quarantine bay, which was no small labor. He could move, just dragging himself with his foreclaws while his hind legs trembled and his ruined wings scraped the ground. And I walked alongside with a hand on the cradle, and made the low steady sounds you make to a frightened animal, the sounds that mean nothing and everything, and he came. The bay was the warmest I had, the one with the good heat core, and I cranked it up until the air went close, and the frost on the inside of the doors melted and ran. I laid down the straw matting I kept for livestock freight, and he settled onto it with a sound I felt in my own chest, a long shuddering exhalation that was almost a groan, and he laid his head down again, and that one gold eye watched me work. I will not pretend I knew what I was doing. I did not. I knew engines and cargo and the moods of the weather. I did not know dragons, not the inside of them, not the keeping of them. But I knew dying when I smelled it, and I had buried enough things at the edge of this dock to have formed an opinion about it, and my opinion was this, that a thing should not have to do it alone, and that if it must be done, it should be done warm. The crew thought I had lost my mind. There were 6 of us at Vale Dock that season, me and 5 others, transfer hands working their contracts, none of them planning to make a life of it the way I had. They came to the bay door in 2s and 3s to look at the dragon, and they wrinkled their noses at the smell and they laughed. "Holt's got himself a pet," said Rennick, who was the loudest of them and the youngest and the one I liked least. "A dying one. That's about your speed, old man." "It's freight," I said. "Paid freight, leave it be." "It's a corpse that hasn't read the bulletin," Rennick said. "You going to read it to him? Tuck him in." And the others laughed, and I let them laugh, because laughing men are not doing harm mostly, and because there is no profit in arguing with a man who has already decided you are a fool. But I noticed Rennick came back, later, alone, and stood at the bay door a long while, not laughing, looking at the great cracked copper body and the wreck of the wings, and I think even Rennick understood at the bottom of himself that there was something wrong about it, something more than freight. We do not generally leave our own to die where strangers can watch. The Wormkin had done exactly that, and even Rennick, who I did not like, felt the wrongness of it. And that is the only kind word I have for him in this whole account, so I will set it down and be fair. That first night I sat in the bay with the dragon, and I did not sleep. He would not eat. I tried him on the protein mash we kept for the livestock cradles, and he turned his head from it. I tried him on water, and that he took, in long shuddering pulls from the trough I dragged over, and I counted that a victory and built on it. Water first. Get water into a dying thing, and you have bought yourself time, and time is the only currency that matters at the edge. In the small hours, when the heat core ticked and the frost groaned against the doors and the dragon's breathing had gone slow and shallow, I did a foolish thing. I talked to him. "I don't know your name," I said. "I don't suppose you'd tell me if you could, your lot don't seem the sort." The gold eye opened a slit. I'm Holt, Joran Holt. I keep this dock, have done 11 years. You're the worst smelling freight I've ever had, and that's a contest with some stiff competition, I'll have you know. The eye watched me. They've gone, your 3 friends, flew off without a backward look. I saw it. I want you to know I saw it because somebody ought to have, and it might as well be me. He made a sound then, low in the chest, a kind of grinding rumble that I would come to know very well, a sound that lived somewhere between a growl and a sigh and was neither. I took it, foolishly, hopefully, as an answer. I have never since had cause to think I was wrong. All right, I said, all right. We'll see the morning, you and I, that's all I'll promise. We'll just see the morning. We saw the morning, and the next, and by the third he ate. It was the mash, finally, when I warmed it on the heat core until it steamed. I had noticed how he leaned toward the core, how the warmth seemed to be the one mercy his cracked body could still receive. And I held the warm pan up near his head and waited, and after a long while the great head lifted, and a tongue came out, dark and forked and long as my arm, and he ate. Not much, but he ate. And when he had done he laid his head back down, and the gold eye closed, fully closed, for the first time since they had set him down, and I understood that he had decided to sleep where I could see him, and I understood what that meant, what trust it took, and I sat down hard on an upturned crate and put my face in my hands, and I will not say what I did then, but I was alone, and it harmed no one. That was the start of it, the kindness, if you want to call it that, though it never felt like kindness from the inside. It felt like the work. A thing was suffering and within my reach, and I had heat and water and time, and so I gave them, and there is no nobility in that, no more than there is nobility in a man pulling another from a fire. You do it because it is in front of you. The nobility, if there is any, is in the ones who walk past. There were a great many who walked past that dragon. I was simply the one who happened to be standing where he was set down. The quiet deepened. The bulletins came in worse each day. The sun pulled further back into its fist, and the frost climbed the tower, and the long dark between the meals stretched until there was hardly a meal that was not eaten in the dark. And on the 9th day the order came down from the inner habs that changed everything, and that gave the whole business its shape, and that I have come to think of, in my private way, as the day I made my last stand, though there was no stand to it, really, and nothing was won. The order was to abandon the dock. It came through on the comm in the flat voice of an administrator who had never set foot on Kasser and never would. The white quiet, the voice said, was projected to be the worst in 40 years. The outer reach would be unsupportable. All frontier facilities were to be sealed and abandoned for the season, all personnel withdrawn to the inner habs, all non-essential freight written off. A withdrawal craft would come for us in 2 days. We were to secure the heat cores on standby, seal the bays, and be at the receiving yard with our kit when it came. Renick whooped when he heard it. The transfer hands all did more or less. They were contract men. The outer reach was a hardship posting, and to be pulled to the inner habs for the worst of the season with full pay was a holiday and a mercy both. They began packing within the hour. I heard them through the tower walls, the laughter, the banging of kit, the relief of men who had been waiting for permission to want out. I went and stood at the door of the quarantine bay. He was better. That is the thing you have to understand. In 9 days he was better, not well, not by a long way, but better. He had eaten every day since the 3rd. The shed scale had mostly come away now, the gray weeping sheets gone, and beneath it the raw copper was hardening at the edges, dulling toward a proper slate, the new hide knitting over the cracks. He could rise onto all 4 legs now and turn himself in the bay, though the wings still hung in ruins and his hind quarters still shook. The smell had changed, no longer the Swedish rot of giving up, but something mineral and clean and alive, the smell of a body doing the hard work of mending. He lifted his head when I came to the door, that morning of the order, and the gold eyes found me, and I swear to you there was a question in them, because animals know. Sick animals especially. They know when the air has changed. They're leaving, I told him. All of them, the whole dock. Worst quiet in 40 years, they say, and I don't doubt it. They've sent a craft 2 days. He watched me. And your freight, I said, written off. They'll seal the bay and leave the core on standby, which means in a week it'll fail and the cold will come in, and I stopped. There is no kind way to say a thing like that, so I did not try. And that's the order, I said instead. That's the order that's come. He made the low grinding sound, the one that lived between a growl and a sigh. And then he did something he had not done before. He dragged himself, slow and trembling, the whole width of the bay, and he laid his great head down at my feet, on the threshold, the long jaw against the toe of my boot, and he looked up at me out of one gold eye, and I have never in my life felt a thing as heavy as that head laid against my foot. I stood there a long time. A man tells himself stories about the choices in his life, that he weighed this against that he reasoned it through, that he came at last to a clear-eyed decision. I will not insult you with that. I did not decide. There was nothing to decide. There was a craft coming in 2 days, and a dock I had kept 11 years, and a dying thing mending on the straw with its head against my boot, and there was simply no version of Joran Holt that got on the craft, and I think I had known that since the 3 wardrakes flew off without a backward look. The deciding had been done for me, somewhere down at the cold bottom of myself, in the place where the one green shoot had put itself out. I was only standing there waiting to admit it. "All right," I said to him. "All right, we'll see the morning, same deal as always, we'll just see the morning." I told the crew that evening. They thought I was joking, then they thought I was mad, then they got angry, which is what men do when they cannot make sense of a thing. Renick was the angriest. He stood in the tower mess with his kit half-packed and shouted at me that I would die, that I would freeze in the dark over a lizard that its own kind had thrown away, that no one would come, that the dragon would be dead in a week and I a week after, and what was it for? What in the cold hells was it for? "You don't even know what it is," he shouted. "It's not even a person, it's a sick animal that scares its own people, and you're going to die for it, for nothing, for a smell in a shed." I let him shout. When he was done, I said the only thing I had, which was the truth, and the truth was small. "He laid his head on my foot," I said. Renick stared at me as if I had spoken in another language, and maybe I had. Then he swore and threw his kit bag against the wall and walked out, and we did not speak again before the craft came. None of them quite knew how to speak to me after that. I had become, in 2 days, a kind of ghost to them, a man who had decided to stay behind, which is to say a man who had decided to die, and the living do not know how to talk to such a man. They gave me a wide berth. I did not mind. I had work to do. I spent those 2 days laying in what I could. I did not have the order's permission, and I did not ask for it. I broke into the long stores and I took fuel cells for the heat core, all of them, every cell on the dock, and I stacked them in the quarantine bay where I could feed them by hand. I took the livestock mash, all of it, and the protein stores, and the water reclamation gear from the tower so I could melt snow without waiting on the failing pumps. I took blankets and tools and the medical kit, such as it was, made for men, and not for dragons but better than nothing. I took the long-range beacon and I checked it twice. I sealed the bays I would not use to save the heat. And I consolidated everything I had into the one warm bay with the dragon, and I made it as much like a den and as little like a dock as I could. The withdrawal craft came on schedule. The crew filed aboard in the gray half-light of what passed for morning, with their kit on their backs, and they did not look at me mostly, the way the wardrakes had not looked at the dragon, and I thought there was a lesson in that and filed it away. Only Renick stopped at the ramp and turned. "Holt," he said, "last chance." "Safe travels," I said. He looked at me a long moment. Then he reached into his kit and pulled out his own cold weather coat, the heavy one, the good one, and he threw it at me, and I caught it. "You'll need it more than me," he said, and turned and went up the ramp. And that is the second kind thing I have to say about Renick and the last, and I have wondered since whether he made the inner halves all right, and I hope he did, and I have never found out. The craft went up. The frost screamed under it the way it had under the wardrakes, and then it was gone into the gray, and the sound of it faded, and I stood in the receiving yard of Vale Dock in the worst quiet in 40 years with one heavy coat and a beacon, and a bay full of fuel cells and a dying dragon mending on the straw. And the silence came down over the whole reach like a lid set on a pot. And I was, for the first time in 11 years, entirely and completely alone. Except I was not. That was the whole point of it. I was not alone, and that made all the difference, and I went back inside to the warm bay, and the gold eyes found me in the half-dark, and I said, "Well, it's you and me now. Let's see the morning," and I fed the core a fresh cell, and I settled in to see it. I will not give you every day of that winter. There were too many of them, and they were too much the same, and you would not thank me for it. But I will give you the shape, because the shape is the thing. The work filled the days, and there was always work. The heat core had to be fed by hand now, on a schedule I worked out by trial. Too much and I burned the cells too fast, too little and the cold crept in and the dragon suffered. And the cold was a patient enemy that probed at every seal and gap and waited for me to fail. I melted snow for water, hauling it in by the bucket from the yard, where it lay piled now in drifts that climbed the doors. I cooked the mash on the core, and I cooked my own meals on it too, and I rationed both of us with a care I had never spent on anything, counting the cells, counting the days, counting the cans, doing the cold arithmetic of survival over and over until I dreamed in numbers. And I tended the molt, which was the hardest and the strangest of it. The new hide came in over those weeks, and it was a brutal business. A thing his body had to do and could only half do without the going to ground his kind needed, and I learned to help. The old shed scale, where it still clung in strips, had to come away or it festered, and so I learned to ease it loose with my hands and a flat blade, working slow along the great cracked plates of him, and at first he could not bear to be touched there and would shudder and grind and snap the air. Never at me, I want that set down. Never once at me, always the air. A warning and not an attack, and I would stop and wait and start again. And over the weeks he learned to bear it and then to want it. And there came a day when he turned a flank toward me of his own accord and held it there and waited. And I understood I had been asked, and I eased the dead scale from his living hide while he lay still and rumbled low in his chest. And it was the most peaceful hour of that whole winter, the two of us in the warm half-dark, me working and him trusting, and the cold shut out beyond the doors. The wings were the grief of it. The membrane had torn too far and too long ago, and no tending I could do would knit it whole. I cleaned them and I kept them from rotting, and I straightened the wing fingers where they had set crooked, and the new growth came in along the edges. But a wing is a sail, and a torn sail does not become whole by mending the edge. He would not fly, not that winter, perhaps not for a long while, perhaps. I did not let myself think it, but I thought it, perhaps never. And he knew. There came an evening, deep in the quiet, when he spread the wings as far as the bay would let him, slow, and held them spread, and looked at the ruin of them, and made a sound I had not heard before and have no word for, a long descending note that filled the bay and the dark and the whole cold reach of Kasser. And I knew it for grief, the grief of a flying thing that has understood it is grounded. And I went and sat against his foreleg and put my hand flat on the warm copper of him and said nothing. Because there was nothing, and we sat that way a long time while the note died away into the silence. He came to know my name. I had said it to him 100 times, Holt, I'm Holt, that's the core, Holt's feeding the core, and there came a day when he answered it. I came into the bay from hauling snow, half frozen, and I said, "It's only me, it's Holt." And he lifted his head and made a sound, low and deliberate, a shaped sound. And it was not a word a man could say, but it was my name, his version of it, a grinding two-note rumble that I have carried in my chest ever since and will carry to my grave. And I stood in the doorway with the snow melting off me, and I laughed, out loud, alone, the first time I had laughed since the craft went up. And he made the sound again, pleased with himself, the great fool, and I went and put my forehead against the warm slate of his jaw and called him every name I had. And that was the night I named him, because a thing should have a name from someone, and I called him Vorel, which was no word of his people that I knew, only a sound I liked, a strong sound, and he took it. And after that I called him Vorel, and he answered, and we were, the two of us, a household. The supplies dwindled. Of course they did. I had taken everything on the dock, but the dock was provisioned for 6 men and a season, not for 1 man and a dragon, and the worst quiet in 40 years, and a dragon eats, even a mending one, even on rations. The mash ran low and then it ran out, and I cut into the protein stores meant for me, and gave him the most of it and ate less myself, and felt the cold get into me the way it had been trying to all along, the way it gets into a body that is not fed enough to fight it. I grew thin. I grew slow. The arithmetic of cells and cans got tighter and tighter until there was no slack left in it at all. And I knew, with the flat, clear knowledge of a man who has done the sums, that we were running out of winter before the winter was running out of us, and that one of us was not going to see the thaw, and that I had to guess which one, and it was not the dragon, because I had been quietly feeding the dragon my own share for some time by then. And a man can do that arithmetic too, and I had done it. And I had decided the way I decide things, which is to say I had not decided at all, I had simply known. I want to be honest about that part. I was not noble about it. I did not make a grand sacrifice. I was cold and tired and hungry and frightened, the way any man is, and there were nights I lay against Vorel's warm side for the heat of him, and wept like a child for the simple animal misery of being cold and hungry and going to die in the dark. And he would rumble low and curl that great body closer around me. And that is the truth of it, that a dying man took comfort from a mending dragon in the dark at the edge of the reach, and there was nothing fine about it. Only 2 living things keeping each other company against the cold, but I kept feeding him my share, because he was mending and I was not, and one of us could be saved, and it was not going to be the one whose own people had flown off without a backward look. That much I could fix. That much was in front of me. The nobility, if there is any, is in the ones who walk past, and I would not walk past, not even from myself. It was near the bottom of the quiet, the deepest dark of it, when the cry came on the wind. I had been half dreaming against Vorel's side, drifting in the gray country a starved man drifts in, when he came suddenly and fully alert beneath me, every muscle of that great body gone tight and still, the head lifted, the gold eyes wide and fixed on the sealed doors and the dark beyond. I came awake at the change in him, and then I heard it, faint and far, riding down the wind out of the deep dark sky, a cry. A long, deep, ululating cry, more than one voice in it. A sound like the war drake's wing drag but shaped into song. A sound that came down out of the cold and through the sealed doors and into the marrow of me, and Vorel answered it. He answered it before I could stop him, before I knew to want to. He lifted his head and opened his throat and gave back a cry of his own, broken and rough and weak from the long winter, but unmistakably a calling. A here I am. And it cracked in the middle and fell away, and he tried again, and I understood, sitting against the warm side of him in the dark, that his people had come back. That the cry on the wind was the wormkin. That they had come, as the war drake had said they would, to collect what remained. And I understood in the same cold instant that they had come too soon, because Vorel was not what remained. Vorel was alive. Vorel was mending. Vorel had answered, here I am, and the cry on the wind had stopped, the song cut off all at once, and in the silence after it I felt the air begin to change, felt the pressure of great wings coming down out of the dark toward Vale Dock, and I got to my feet, slow and thin and frightened, and I put my hand on Vorel's heaving flank and I said, all right, they've come. Let's see what they've come for. Let's see the morning, you and I. And I went, on legs that did not want to carry me, to open the doors. They had not come to collect bones. I will set down what I saw, plainly, the way I have set down all the rest, though it is the part of this account that no one quite believes, and I do not blame them, for I was there and I half do not believe it myself. I hauled back the great bay doors against the piled snow, and the cold came in like a blow, and the deep dark sky over the receiving yard was full of wings. Not 3. A dozen, 2 dozen more, the wormkin come down in a great spiraling column out of the night, slate and bronze and black, and the snow steamed and screamed beneath them as they landed, and the yard filled with the bulk and the breath and the forge gold eyes of more dragons than I had ever seen or imagined. And at the heart of them, settling last and slowest, came one I knew at a glance for what she was, though I had never seen her like, because some things announce themselves. She was old. That was the first thing. Old the way a mountain is old, the way the deep dark is old, a great age that had nothing of frailty in it, only weight, only authority laid down in layer over patient layer. Her scale was not slate but a deep banked red, the red of coals under ash, dull on the surface and glowing somewhere beneath, and her horns were swept back and yellowed and immense, and there were old scars on her, white-heeled, the scars of a long life lived hard, and when she folded her wings, and her wings were whole, were vast, were the kind of wings Vorel would never have again. The whole yard seemed to lower itself around her without moving an inch. The others gave her room the way water gives a stone room. She was the Ember Matron. I did not need to be told. I have never since needed to be told a thing so little. She looked at me first. A small, thin, cold human standing in a doorway, and she looked at me, and the forge gold eyes were not flat the way the war drakes had been. There was a mind behind them, ancient and quick, and it took me in the thinness of me, the cold of me, the dock behind me, all of it in a single long, unhurried look. And then it went past me into the warm dark of the bay to Vorel. And Vorel dragged himself out into the snow to meet her. He should not have. He was too weak, and the cold was death to his half-mended hide, and I made a sound to stop him and reach for him, but he went, slow and trembling, out past me into the steaming snow of the yard, and he lifted his head before the Ember Matron, and he made the low grinding sound, the one that lived between a growl and a sigh, and she went very still. A long silence held the yard. 24 dragons and one thin human, and the snow steaming and the deep dark over all of it, and no sound but the wind and Vorel's labored breathing. Then the Ember Matron spoke, and she spoke in our words, low and grinding like the wardrake had, but where his voice had been rock dragged over rock, hers was the rock itself, the deep root of the mountain finding speech, and what she said I have carried with me ever since. "We grieved you into the long," she said to Vorel. "Your name is spoken in the long these 40 days among the honored dead. We sang you gone." And Vorel answered her, in his own tongue, that broken descending note, and I could not understand the words of it, but I understood the shape of the thing that passed between them, because grief and shame have a shape that crosses any tongue, and what passed between them was this: that he had been molt cursed, that the soured molt had been taken among his people for a death mark and a shame, that his own kin had carried him off to die in quarantine out of the sight of the long, so that the shame would not touch them, that they had grieved him not because they thought him dead but because they had decided he would be, had sung him into the memory of the honored dead while he yet lived because it was cleaner than the truth, and that the Ember Matron had not known. That was the thing. She had not known. She had been told he was dead of the molt, properly dead, and she had sung him gone, and she had come now at the bottom of the quiet to this human dock at the edge of the reach. I learned this later in pieces, from the ones who would speak to me. She had come because something in the telling had not sat right with her, because 40 years of ruling had taught her the smell of a clean story laid over a dirty one, and she had come to see for herself what remained of the son of her own hatching. For he was that. Vorel was that. The molt-cursed drake the Sky Court had carried off to die where strangers could watch. He was a shield drake of the Ember Matron's own line, born of her own hatching, a war drake of the long whose name was sung now among the honored dead, and his own kin had thrown him away to save themselves the shame of him, and the matron had come to bury what remained. And what remained was alive, and whole near enough, and warm, and it had dragged itself out into the snow to meet her on its own 4 legs, and it stood before her trembling in the cold, mended, kept, named, and it turned its head and looked back at me in the doorway, the small, thin human who had not flown off without a backward look, and the Ember Matron followed that look. She came toward me. The whole yard of dragons watched her come, and the snow steamed under her, and she lowered that great ancient red head until the forge gold eye was level with my face, an arm's length away, close enough that her breath rolled over me warm and smelling of stone and fire, and she looked at me for a long, long while. "You are the keeper," she said. "Joran Holt," I said. My voice did not shake, which surprised me. "I keep this dock." "They left him to die in your sight," she said. "They did. And you did not let him." "No," I said. "He laid his head on my foot, that was all. He laid his head on my foot, and I stopped." There were no more words to it than that, and I did not have the strength to invent any, so I said the truth, which was small. "A thing was suffering and in front of me," I said, "and I had heat and water and time, so I gave them. That's all it was. That's all it ever is." The Ember Matron held me in that ancient golden gaze, and I felt myself weighed, the way she had weighed the clean story laid over the dirty one, and I did not know what the verdict would be, and I was too tired and too cold to fear it much, and so I simply stood and let her weigh me. And then she did a thing that I have spent the rest of my life failing to deserve. She did not kneel. I want that understood because the story has grown in the telling, out there beyond the reach, and they say the Ember Matron knelt to the human keeper and the whole flight knelt with her, and it is a fine story and it is not true, and I will not have it. She did not kneel. Dragons do not kneel, and it would have shamed us both, and she knew it, the way she knew everything. She did something quieter and harder and worth 1,000 kneelings. She lifted her great head and she opened her throat, there in the steaming yard at the bottom of the quiet, and she sang. It was the Long. I know that now. The Long is the memory of the Wormkin, the recited line of all their honored, the living and the dead, sung down the generations so that no name worth keeping is ever lost. It is the closest thing their kind has to a soul, I think, the thread that runs through all of them and binds the living to the gone. And the Ember Matron sang it there in the yard, and the 24 dragons took it up behind her, the whole flight lifting their voices into the deep dark. A vast braided cord of grinding ancient song that I felt in the soles of my feet and the roots of my teeth and the floor of my chest. And I did not understand a word of it, and I understood all of it. She sang Vorel back. That was the first of it. She unmade his grieving, took his name out from among the honored dead, where his kin had hidden it, and set it back among the living, and the flight sang it with her. And Vorel lifted his ruined head and his broken voice, and sang his own name back into the line of the living. And it was the most terrible and beautiful thing I have ever heard, a thing brought back from the dead singing itself alive. And then she sang a name I did not know, a new name. A name that had never been in the Long before, because it was not a Wormkin name. It was a name shaped for our words and theirs both. A name with Holt in the middle of it like a stone in a fruit. And the flight took it up and sang it. 24 ancient voices grinding a thin, cold human's name into the living memory of the Wormkin, the first such name in all the long count of the Long. And the Ember Matron lowered her head to me again as she sang it, and I understood that she was setting me into the thread that bound her kind, that for as long as the Wormkin sang the Long there would be a human name in it, mine, the keeper who would not walk past, and that I would not be lost. That when I was bones, and the dock was ruin, and Casser's poor son had pulled its light in for the last time, there would still be a flight of dragons somewhere under some sky singing the name of Joran Holt among their honored, because of one dying thing that laid its head on my foot. I did not weep. I had no strength left for it. I stood in the doorway of the bay with the song going through me and the snow steaming in the yard and the deep dark full of wings, and I held myself up against the door frame and let them sing me into the Long, and I thought, with the small, flat, clear part of my mind that never stops doing arithmetic, I will see the thaw after all. They will feed me. I will see the morning. And I did. They fed me, they mended the dock. The Ember Matron's flight stayed through the bottom of the quiet and into the turning of it, and they hunted the deep reaches and brought back meat, and they tore the seals off the long stores I had not dared touch, and they kept the heat cores roaring with a fire of their own that needed no cells at all. And I grew strong again, slow, the way Vorel had grown strong. the two of us mending side by side through the tale of that long winter, while the dragons came and went overhead, and the dock that had been left to die became, of all the strange things, a kind of chord. And when the thaw came, and it came, late, grudging, Casser's thin sun pushing its light back out of its fist a little at a time until the frost let go of the open ground and the white came off the reach in patches of wet black earth. When the thaw came, the Ember Matron made ready to take her flight home, and she came to the bay door a last time, and she asked Vorel to come with her. Back to the reaches. Back to the living Long, to take his place again among his own. And Vorel would not go. I did not ask him to stay. I want that understood too. I would not have. He was mended enough by then to make his own way, even grounded, even wingless, and his place was with his own kind in the high cold reaches among the long, and I would not have kept him from it, not for anything, not for the company through the next winter, not for the warm side of him against the cold, not for any of it. He had been thrown away once already, and I would not be a second thing that kept him from his people. So I did not ask. But he would not go. He went out into the wet black yard and he stood before the Ember Matron in the thin new light, and they spoke a long while in their own grinding tongue, and at the end of it she lowered her great ancient head and she touched her brow to his gently, the old red brow to the new slate one, and she made a sound that needed no translating, and she turned, and she opened her vast whole wings, and she went up into the thawing sky with all her flight behind her, and she did look back. She looked back at the dock, at the dragon, at the human in the doorway, a long look, and then she was gone into the high cold light, and the yard was quiet, and it was just the two of us again, the way it had been all winter. Vorel came back into the bay. He laid himself down on the straw in the warm, the way he had 100 times, and he laid his head down, and the gold eye found me, and he made the low grinding sound, the one that lived between a growl and a sigh, the one I had taken from the very first night as an answer and never once been wrong to. "You great fool," I said, "your queen came for you, your whole sky came for you, and you stayed at a freight dock at the edge of the reach with an old man who feeds you his own dinner." He made the sound again. And then he made the other sound, the shaped one, the two-note grinding rumble that was my name in his mouth. "Holt, here I am." And he laid his head over on the straw and closed his eyes to sleep where I could see him, the way he had since the third day, and I understood, the way I understand things, which is to say all at once and without deciding, that he had not stayed for his people, because his people had thrown him away, and he had not stayed for the long, though the long would sing his name and mine both until the last of them. He had stayed because a thing should not have to do it alone, and because if it must be done it should be done warm, and because somewhere down at the cold bottom of him, the same place where my one green shoot had put itself out, he had decided, which is to say he had not decided at all, he had simply known that the place he belonged was the place where someone had not walked past. We saw the thaw out, the two of us. We saw a great many mornings after that, more than I had any right to. He never flew again. I want to end on the truth, and that is the truth. The wings never came back whole, and he never again rode the high cold light the way his kind were made to. And there were evenings, he would spread the ruin of them and look at it and make the long descending note of grief. And I would go and sit against his warm foreleg and put my hand on the slate of him and say nothing, because there was nothing, and we would sit that way until the note died into the quiet. But he stayed grounded with me, at the edge of the reach, at a dock the skycord had left to die, and the wormkin came down out of the high light to see him through every quiet after, and they brought meat and warmth and the song of the long, and they spoke my name among their honored. And when at last I am bones and the dock is ruin and Casser's poor sun has pulled in its light for good, there will still be dragons under some sky singing the name of Joran Holt, the keeper who would not walk past. I did not save him to be sung. I want that set down plainly the last of all, because it is the heart of the whole thing and the easiest part to lose in the telling. I did not do it to be honored. There was no honor in it from the inside, and there is no honor in it now. A thing was suffering and in front of me, and I had heat and water and time, and so I gave them. That is all it was. That is all it ever is. The nobility, if there is any, is in the ones who walk past, and they are many, and they fly off without a backward look, and the snow makes them tidy in the end the same as anyone. But a thing should not have to do it alone, and if it must be done, it should be done warm. That is the whole of what I know, after 11 years on the dock and one long winter at the bottom of the world, and it cost me a season and very nearly cost me my life, and I would pay it again tomorrow, and twice on the day after, for the weight of one great head laid down across the toe of my boot in the failing light. He laid his head on my foot, that was all. I have never found in all the years since that there was anything more to say.